Um, it's been about 18 months, and we're excited for you to see it tonight. As you just heard, the meeting is being recorded. If you are also recording the meeting, please make yourself known. We're looking forward to hearing from Judy tonight, who has been our close partner in crafting the long-range plan. So without further ado, I will introduce Judy to take it away.
So thank you, Cheryl, and hi, Corinne. I'm happy to be here. I do have some slides to go through to kind of orient people to the draft plan, and happy to answer any questions. I think it would be great, since the slides are fairly involved, if people have questions, to use the Q&A, put them in there, and we will track the Q&A, and we will be happy to respond to questions when we get to that point. But I'd like to go through the slides first without stopping. It would just be a better flow. But I don't want you to be frustrated. So if you have a question, just please use Q&A, and we will be happy to, to respond. So can you see that, Corinne? Is that showing up correctly?
Yes, okay, we can see it.
Great. So this is a public presentation of the draft plan, which is currently out for public comment until, I believe, June 6th. Am I right about that, Corinne, or is it an extended date from there?
June 6th, that's correct.
Okay, super. So I'm going to walk you through the plan, and it's by section, because I think it's the easiest way to be able to see the document without actually seeing it. The organization of the plan is fairly traditional. I think that's good, because there is a flow to these documents that I think is pretty helpful to readers. Typically, we start out by laying out for the reader what the vision is that the plan seeks to achieve. And for that vision to materialize, there have to be certain goals. So there are goals in the plan for each of the major components, as well as two topics that are kind of overarching themes throughout. And one of those is sustainability, and the other is equity. From there, all the other components of the plan that you see on this slide are typical master plan components in Massachusetts, all of which are kind of identified in the state's master plan statute, which planning boards are directed to follow. It's Chapter 41, Section 81D. So the vision of this plan, Long Meadow's plan is kind of neat. One thing that I think makes it very different from most plans, even though there is sort of a traditional framework, is this focus on climate resilience. The town wanted to have a master plan that, on the one hand, accomplished what the state law intends, but to make sure that the plan is very much organized and devoted to making Long Meadow a climate resilient place. And that will be achieved as we go through the document in both formal and somewhat informal ways. For example, there are things that the municipality should do. There are things that other kind of larger organizations should do. And there are things that individual people, residents and businesses can do, all to contribute to making the town a climate resilient community. At the same time, there is an overarching theme of equity. And equity relates to this plan in a couple of ways. One is making sure that if there is a natural hazard associated with climate change or anything else, that people, everyone who has a need to be told so they can respond, will have adequate communication access to be aware of what's happening so they can make decisions accordingly. But equity kind of has even more meaning than that. It really is about the kind of community that one wants to be in terms of matters of basic social fairness. So when we think about sustainability and equity together, it's really difficult to have a community that's truly sustainable without planning for equity as well. And it would be a little bit difficult to have an equitable community if you weren't paying attention to sustainability. With those two overarching themes in play, we then have the traditional elements of a master plan under Massachusetts law. And for each one, there is attention paid to how does sustainability relate to this component? How does equity relate to this component? And you'll see that in these slides as we go forward. So for each of those themes that comprise the vision statement for the plan, there's sort of a statement, a direction, a policy framework for how that goal is to be addressed by the plan. And I don't want to read a lot of text to you, but I think I'm going to try to summarize some of these so that you have a sense of where we're going with this document. So for sustainability, a natural goal to be attempting to achieve would to have a focus on long-term sustainability, including climate change, when you're making decisions about human, financial, or infrastructure resources. So as the town makes implementation choices going forward, that there will be a focus, an awareness, and a prioritization of sustainability. Equity similarly has, as I said earlier, this sort of overarching theme. The goal in the plan is to create a place that welcomes and engages and supports residents of all ages, incomes, and abilities. On land use, it's thinking about how to require new development to at least achieve, if not exceed, industry standards for sustainable design, while ensuring that codes and land use regulations evolve. You probably know this, but just to be clear, there is an evolving science here. And I think one of the great challenges for communities trying to be climate resilient is staying on top of that science as it evolves and keeping your plan alive to those changes as you go forward. So understanding that you always want to be on top of what those industry standards are, and making sure that your codes and your regulations are attentive to those changes will be an important part of implementation. Addressing traffic congestion and improving infrastructure. The town has done some good work on pedestrian and bicycle accommodation. There's more to be done. So making sure that as your community grows and changes, that you have multiple ways for people to get around beyond being reliant on a car. On natural resources, the goal is to restore, conserve, and protect your natural environment and the biodiversity that exists there through management, regulation, and public education. Cultural resource areas really is about understanding how the history of your town informs what it is today, protecting those resources, and promoting inclusivity by increasing engagement and diversity of the cultural events in your community. Providing a framework of connected and well-maintained open space, increasing the range of housing types and the affordable housing supply to meet the needs of people throughout their lives. Bolstering economic activity by expanding and diversifying the commercial and recreational opportunities that you have, and then ensuring that your municipal facilities and services meet the needs of residents and protect public health. So those are the guiding goal statements of the plan. When we get to talking about the implementation program, you will see how these provide sort of the scaffold for organizing the actions that are in the plan. This is simply an image of what the table of contents is for the document. As I said, it's sort of a fairly traditional arrangement of the components of a master plan, but that makes it easy to navigate as well. And I'll talk a little bit as we go forward about what's sort of in those appendix sections that are not spelled out specifically on this slide. So there is this overarching framework, as I alluded to earlier, that's around climate resilience, climate science and long-range planning, and social equity and community planning. And I think these kind of pieces that came out of the plan are important to understand. These are kind of segments from the plan that I'd like to underscore. What is a climate resilient community? Well, first of all, it's one that has a healthy natural environment and thriving ecosystems, combined with local infrastructure and services that can adapt to future conditions. That's a climate resilient community. That's what Longmeadow seeks to achieve through the implementation of this plan. Climate change mitigation aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, slow the pace of global warming, and avoid the worst potential impacts of climate change. These are kind of the threads, again, that sort of guide how action items were chosen for the implementation program of this plan. Climate change adaptation is a process of action that changes the elements of the built or natural environment so it's better able to survive. Climate change amplifies threats that already exist in social, environmental, and built environments and historically underserved communities. So this plan strives to identify the inequities and acknowledge disparities in the capacity for resilience in order to allow policy and actions to support the most vulnerable members of the Longmeadow community. There was quite a bit of engagement in this plan. There was a wonderful long-range plan steering committee that met very faithfully, every other month over the past many months that this plan evolved. There were also other pieces, however, which relate to the components of the appendix that I will talk more about later. One of which is the Capital Improvement Planning Process Working Group. So one piece of the scope of work that was associated with this project was to look at the town's existing capital planning process, decision-making, to really think about, well, we're making investments that can either further our interest in climate resilience or not. So how do we build climate science thinking into the public facility and infrastructure decisions that we made? So that was one piece of this, which Beta Group, one of our colleagues on the project, really spent quite a bit of time on and was sort of the lead for. And if there are any questions about that later, we'll probably bring in somebody from Beta to respond to those. But that was a specific task in the project that was done in support of having an implementation program that would focus on climate science. There was also an age-friendly task force. So Pioneer Valley Planning Commission assisted with this. There was an interest by the town for reaching age-friendly and dementia-friendly classifications from AARP. It takes a working group to make that happen and certain actions. So that was another kind of component of the planning process, really relating to equity for this plan. There were a series of focus groups. There were interviews early on in the process. The consulting team spoke with lots of people in Longmeadow. Not everyone agreed, which is great, but we certainly learned a lot about the town and the issues that it faces. And those were I think, played an instrumental role in shaping how the consulting team went about understanding the baseline, if you will, in the community that constitutes the sort of inventory, which is a big baseline document and key part of the plan. There was a community survey. There was a big community meeting a year ago that was in person. This is the second tonight community meeting, which is being done virtually because we're not really doing an interactive session at this point. This is really informational and to answer questions from the community. So this is the second of the two community meetings that were built into the project. So the inventory and assessment is a big piece of every master plan. It's the picture of where are you, who are you, what do you have, what do you not have, where are your struggles, where's your capacity, what's the situation, the sort of environmental assessment, if you will, as to where you are today. So for the core elements I referred to earlier, these are, of course, the traditional elements of a master plan in Massachusetts: land use, transportation, natural and cultural resource areas, open space, housing, economic development, and community facilities. The inventory and assessment includes literally an inventory of where you are on each one of those elements. Within each element, there is this common structure. And one of the ways that the elements are, or the inventory is sort of bound together, is looking at, for each one of these, what's the relationship to sustainability and climate resilience? Like, how does land use relate to this? How does housing relate to this? How does public facilities relate to this? What's the connection to equity? So that it tries to help the reader understand how these overarching pieces come together to inform the entire structure of the plan. From that, or surrounding that, is this sort of existing conditions assessment, as I said, that looks at kind of where you are. It's a statistical look, it's a mapping look, it's a geographic look, it's a look at trends. And then also, what's your local capacity today? When you are trying to manage land use, when you're trying to address economic development needs, what capacity do you have in your community now? And what is the policy framework within which people act and people make decisions? So that's the inventory and assessment component of the plan. And I'm just going to summarize a little bit of this for you. The document is rich with information here that I'm not going to try to get to in total, but I'll give you a flavor of what each of these components is about. in any master plan, any community master plan, land use is really the heart of it. Land use is a critical piece of long range planning. If a master plan does nothing else, it really is like a map, a guide map for the physical evolution of your community, taking into account your needs for a local economy, your needs for housing, your needs for public services, and so on. That's the function of a master plan, and land use is what coheres all of that and brings it together. So when we write a land use element, we're thinking about like, what is the physical layout of this place? And what is the impact of that on the social, economic, environmental aspects of your community? How does the physical layout of your town essentially shape those pieces of who you are? There's an assessment of kind of past and present land use policies to identify perhaps areas that are most inappropriate or appropriate for future development, and aligning your policies with what those locations are and what their needs are. Land use and climate are just integrally linked. They are part of the same system. Land cover can act as a net contributor, or a sink, so-called, of atmospheric carbon. Changing climate may drive changes in land use cover, and land cover as human communities adapt to hotter and less predictable weather patterns. Land use patterns also indicate where someone can find housing, schools, open space, jobs, and so forth, and who has access to those. So land use is a critical piece of every master plan, and it typically is the first component of any inventory and assessment. It's sort of like, where are you today physically in your community, and how does that shape your current climate resilience status, your housing, your equity, and so on. So this is just a land use map. There are many maps in the plan. I don't have all of them in here. It would take a long time. But this is a land use map. This is essentially the inventory of where you are today. And just to help you interpret that legend, the very lightest color, lightest yellow, is residential. It's single family residential. So you can kind of get a really easy picture of the town at this point. It's a community that has evolved as a single family residential suburb. There is open space, there is public land, there is some commercial development, but actually very little, because the town's identity is very much shaped by the single family residential development pattern that exists and its open space and natural resources. Transportation and land use are so connected, it's almost impossible to separate them. When we're working on master plans, we look at these two together. So a well-functioning transportation system, which is what you're trying to diagnose and you're doing the inventory and assessment, is something that provides for safety and mobility for people through many modes of travel. You've done a lot in your town. The first time I went there, I was really quite impressed to see some of the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure that is there. Transportation system design, together with land use, clearly has an inextricable impact on energy consumption, equity, traffic, and the whole host of concerns that underlie this plan. The choices you make as a community to maintain and enhance the transportation system you have is going to affect how people get around and interact both internally and with their neighboring communities. It also is going to affect your ability to achieve equity or to reinforce inequity. Access to transportation affects how people can get around, especially people who are lower income, who often cannot afford cost-burdened, very cost-intensive fares for public transportation. So understanding the ways in which you need to diversify your transportation system if you're trying to be an equitable community is very important. Not surprisingly, in towns with low-density settlement patterns, the lack of access to transportation can lead to more reliance on cars, and that, of course, contributes negatively to the town's desire to be a climate-resilient community. Natural and cultural resource areas, the inventory and assessment here is a look at, well, what are the natural resources in your community? The wetlands, what is the biodiversity makeup of your open and protected conservation land? What is the historic fabric in your community that kind of defines your built environment and the sense of who you are? Climate change is going to affect every type of natural resource in your community, from distribution of plant and animal species, as rising temperatures are going to alter ecosystems. Climate change can also add to the challenges of conserving cultural resources by increasing vulnerability. Integrating equity into natural and cultural resources planning really begins by understanding the diversity of the community and providing resources that are accessible to everyone. So when we're doing an element for natural and cultural resources, we're looking at those things. What is available? What condition is it in? And how accessible is it to a wide variety of people who are either living in your community or working in your community? What is the degree of equity or not access to those resources? And what steps is the town taking to protect and promote them? Open space and recreation is kind of related to the natural resources element, but this is really not only around conservation land, but also recreational land, more developed facilities and so forth. Obviously, open space and recreation areas contribute to the quality of life in a town. They affect the sense of public life. They contribute to the sort of visual character of your community. They certainly play an integral role in public health. People who don't live near open space or who lack access to public transportation to reach open space are going to be disproportionately affected by extreme heat in the coming decades. So planning for equity in open space really requires us to think about who are all the people in our community, whether they live there, work there, or have some other connection to the community, and how do we best meet those needs in planning for open space and recreation facilities in the future. Housing and residential development, as I showed on the map, and I don't think it's a surprise to anybody who's participating in this meeting tonight, you are a well-established land use pattern in your community with a lot of 19th and 20th century homes. The street network is beautiful. You are largely built out, although that's often a misnomer. Build out is sort of a function of what your zoning say. There hasn't been a lot of new housing development in Longmeadow over the past few decades. That is not the cause of rising home prices, but it's related to it. When you have a demand, as people would want to live in Longmeadow, when the demand outstrips the supply, then of course pricing is going to be the mitigating factor that tries to bring those two forces into alignment. So housing affects climate change through greenhouse gas emissions relating to the burning of fossil fuels, water and space heating powered by combustion of fossil fuels in residential and commercial buildings is currently responsible for about 27% of greenhouse gas emissions in Massachusetts. The impact of more high temperature days is going to fall disproportionately on senior and low income members of your community who may not be able to afford to install or maintain cooling systems in their homes or upgrade the systems that they have. So again, trying to think about both the climate resilience and sustainability piece of the policy framework on this plan, but also equity. That really is an important piece, I think, especially for housing, because you have to think about where people live and the housing conditions in which they live, and are they equipped to be climate science ready, climate change ready. Economic development. People often think economic development is about building your tax base. And you can kind of understand why, because local governments are so dependent on tax revenue. But economic development is a lot more than that. It is about jobs in the community. It is about the quality of life in the community for both people who live there and the people who work in the community who support that quality of life. To some extent, the economic conditions in any community are driven by household incomes. So there is an equity thread in economic development that I think any community would want to think about. As time goes forward here, both residents and business owners in your community should expect to see greater average temperatures and increased precipitation through mid-century. These changes are likely to result in more frequent and severe storms. Planning for equity and economic development really begins by recognizing the needs of different community members and creating policies and programs that address their needs. So again, thinking about not only where can you go shopping, but what are the opportunities in your community for access to capital and workforce development, creating programs for job creation for people who are underserved, or providing educational opportunities for people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Those are all things to think about in planning for equity in economic development. Community facilities and services is really about the stuff you have in your community that supports your way of life. It's about your water, your wastewater systems, stormwater management, public safety, public schools, your cultural and recreational resources. It's the inventory. So the inventory is looking at what do you have, and then thinking about the ways in which climate change and equity interface with these topics. So from a climate change perspective, vulnerable populations that most rely on services are disproportionately affected by climate change. I think that's really something that people need to grapple with. Children, the elderly, people with pre-existing health conditions are more likely to be vulnerable to extreme heat, poor air quality, and extreme storms and power outages. From an equity perspective, public facilities and services may be inaccessible to people with disabilities or located in areas that are not easily accessible. So thinking about the sort of design of your built environment, how do you make sure that as you prepare for modification, renovation, extension, expansion of the public facilities that you have, how do you make sure that everybody has access to those services, programs, and facilities? Out of that inventory of kind of what you've got, there are a number of key issues that are enumerated in the plan. And those key issues, not really surprising, are around preparedness for climate change, community health. To what extent is the community really prepared to protect and defend health as climate change and the conditions of climate change intensify? How do you think about economic development? What is your policy framework for economic development? How equitable is it, and how well does it serve the needs of the community, consumers, and so forth? Planning for housing is an issue in every community we work in. It's probably the hardest one in most master plans, but you really can't talk about a climate resilient and equitable community without talking about housing. So the plan kind of names that also as an issue. The present protection of your open space and natural resources, continuing to improve the transportation infrastructure that you have, looking at the regulatory barriers in your community to addressing the different types of housing needs, economic development needs, how you plan for regulating development so that as development occurs, you have very much a climate science framework in mind, but also a way to make your rules clear about what people can do to address some of the needs that are identified in the plan without having to go through permitting processes that may by themselves be impediments. Understanding the whole framework of hidden communities. This is a piece of the plan that I've kind of been alluding to as I went along and talking about some of the equity issues in the plan. The question for hidden communities is, who's in your community that you may not be thinking about, that you may not know about? But if you're actually going to have an equitable framework for protecting everyone as climate change persists, how do you make sure you know who those populations are so they have equitable access to information, equitable access to resources, and so on? So a kind of a big part of the planning process was identifying and understanding who those so-called hidden communities are. And that is, of course, one of the appendices in the plan. Capital improvements planning, how to right size your capital improvements planning process and decision making so it's as climate oriented as possible, and then making what needs to happen to sort of make Longmeadow more age friendly, which is an equity question. If anything is in this plan, it's an important one. So the implementation program is organized around the goals, which you saw earlier. I'm not listing all the actions here. I'm just telling you that there are a variety of actions under each one of these. So for the sustainability goal, there are like 4 key actions. The equity goal, there are 10. The land use goal, there are 7. These are all the kind of things the town is being encouraged to think about as it implements this plan. What are the actions we need to take to address these goals? That's really what an implementation program is. We have these goals, we have these needs. Now, what do we need to do to address them? So there are 5 key actions for natural resources, 13 for transportation and circulation, 7 for cultural resource areas, 7 for open space and recreation, 13 for housing and residential development, 5 for economic development, and 15 for community facilities. So some of these elements, which is not uncommon, by the way, sort of have more actions associated with them than others. And it really is a function of what did the consulting team find in consultation with the long range plan committee and town staff, and to what extent are there things that the community actually can do and probably should do to address those goals. For each one of the actions that are in the implementation program, they're kind of rated 2 ways. One is around urgency and the other is relative impact. And those are kind of different concepts. So urgency is, we need to do this right away because there are things that are already a problem. And if we don't do something pretty quickly, they're going to become even a bigger problem than they are. So an urgent matter is something that you would seek to address in the first 1 to 3 years of implementing your long range plan. Moderate is not unimportant. It's just not quite as urgent. You have to be able, in all the actions that communities want to see in their master plans, you have to be able to sort them into buckets, because the worst thing you can do, excuse me, is put so many things in an urgent category or so many things in high priority that you cannot do them all. So there's this parsing process that you have to go through to say, we really need to do this thing first. This other thing we need to do, but it's not quite as urgent as this, or we need to take some interim steps in order to be able to address some urgent tasks. So they're in buckets of high, moderate, and low urgency. It's not uncommon, I think, in master plan implementation programs for something to be urgent, but it may take a longer term to address it because it's more complicated, it takes more resources, it takes personnel, whatever the factor is. So it's important not to just try to correlate urgency with impact. They're not really the same, although they sometimes do correlate. Impact is, if we do this, a large number of people are going to benefit or will be affected by it right away. So this has, this could be a major impact in terms of the budget. It may have a major environmental impact, but there's going to be a measurable, identifiable, recognizable high impact of an action. There are actions that are sort of medium impact, and they are, well, a medium number of residents are affected, or there's a moderate budgetary impact of this, or there's a moderate environmental impact. And then, not surprisingly, a lower impact is a smaller number of residents or constituents are affected. And it may be important, but just the impact is not as great. So for every action in the implementation program, not only is the action spelled out and who's supposed to do it and where does leadership come from, because clearly there has to be a delegation or an assignment of responsibility, but also for each individual action, what's its urgency and what's its impact. What the plan concludes with is a series of appendices. There is a regulatory barriers analysis, which looks at, gosh, you have zoning or other types of regulations that could make it hard to address one or more of the goals in your plan. The Hidden Communities report is an appendix to the document. The whole capital improvements planning process that Beta worked on with the town is a separate appendix as well. And then the steps toward making Longmeadow an age-friendly community are also there. So what you have in the end is a document that's going to look pretty big, but it's in part because there were multiple pieces of this process that were going along in tandem or in parallel as the master plan itself was being developed. So that is, kind of where the document is at this point. The plan has been published for public comment through June 6th. There is a joint planning board select board meeting on June 5th, where we will be taking up the plan as well. Beyond that, ultimately for the plan to have kind of legal meaning under Massachusetts law, the planning board will be asked to adopt it. And then you get to work on implementation. And I would simply say, if there's something you can implement now, you don't need to wait. You go ahead and do it because it's that important for your community. So I'm happy to, address any questions that I can. We're open for comments and so forth. I think, Corinne, I'm probably going to let you manage the the question process here. And I think maybe I'll take the slides down unless, do you want me to keep them up?
I think you could take them down, and then if somebody has a question about a particular slide, maybe we could try and navigate back. So,
Works.
Judy had asked, Judy had at the beginning of the presentation pointed out the Q&A feature here. I don't see any questions listed. If anybody has any questions that they would like to have addressed, you can go ahead and write those in the Q&A feature. If anybody hasn't used that before, if you move your mouse to the bottom of your screen, it'll sort of highlight a toolbar at the bottom, and there's like a little dialog box that says Q&A under it. You can type your questions in there.
Right. Yep.
Judy, while we're waiting for questions, would you comment a little bit more about the work that you did with the Hidden Communities report, and then also the work that went into the age-friendly designation? I feel like those were both two really important pieces of the plan, and I think that the folks would benefit from hearing a little bit more about them.
Yeah, so the Hidden Communities report was really an attempt to understand who is in your community who's not obvious to everyone. I don't know how else to put it, but the concern is that you need to know how to reach them, how to understand their needs, and how to incorporate them in the planning and implementation process. So there were conversations, a lot of it was interview based, it's also statistically based, looking at are there populations in your community, for example, where there are households with limited English proficiency? Are there populations working in your community who don't live there, but they're working in your community, and how do you connect with them? So conversations with, Council on Aging, with human service providers, with town staff, with the schools. It's one of the best sources we often have for a master plan process on anything around social equity is the school department. So there were a lot of just consultations that took place in order to understand who's out there who may not be recognized by mainstream Longmeadow. And out of that kind of came a picture, I think, of aspects of your community that may not be that well known. People may not even understand that you have people in your community who are not all the same. So you're looking at your minority population, your limited English population, your disability population, seniors who may not be that obvious because they don't have a lot of money. But then thinking about, like, how do you connect with these populations in the event of a crisis? So that was I think the real focus of the Hidden Communities piece. Did you also ask about the capital improvement? Oh, it was age friendly, sorry. So Pioneer Valley Planning Commission assisted with that. There were some meetings with a subset of folks from the Council on Aging, and I think some others as well, to sort of document the interests and needs of the older population in Longmeadow, where people saw needs that needed to be addressed, whether it's in transportation or other forms of mobility, social services, public services, and how the town would go about seeking to address those. And in doing so, you then sort of qualify for an age-friendly designation from an organization I think many are probably familiar with. It's AARP, and that sometimes opens the door for some funding to address the needs that are identified in it. But an age-friendly community we think of as planners is friendly to everybody. And I'll just give you an example. We often think about things like accessible entries, accessible walkways, and so forth to accommodate older adults. But those same accommodation features support moms with babies in a carriage. It's people whose mobility needs kind of go beyond the obvious. That's an example of a way in which an age-friendly community is an everyone-friendly community. So that was a lot of the focus of that piece. And as I said, we worked on it, and Pioneer Valley Planning Commission worked on it. And there's a whole section in the appendix on what all that means and what the community would need to do to be a more age-friendly place than it already is. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I am seeing that we have a raised hand. Tom Shea has raised his hand. So Tom, I'm going to hit the allow you to talk button, which will unmute you. But right before I do that, I realized there's something I just wanted to add on to what Judy was saying regarding specifically the AARP age-friendly task force and that piece of this long-range plan, which was that was a goal actually that the select board had set for the town becoming an age-friendly community. I think a couple of years before we began this process. I don't totally remember the date that they made that resolution, I think, to try and achieve that goal. So we saw the opportunity in updating our long-range plan to really weave those considerations throughout town planning as a whole. I think it fit very naturally in, but it was, I just wanted to acknowledge the select board that was a goal that they had already identified working
Thank you.
with the Council on Aging. Okay, so Tom, I'm allowing you to talk.
Ren, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you to the select board for the AARP focus. I received my first social security check last week. First thing, just a couple of things that may have been missing here. The historic town green is a focal point of the town. And I know like the East Long Meadow Town Plan looks at the center of their town. So I believe there should be a section in here on the historic town green, the future use of the community house and the town hall, both of which will be vacant or barely used in the fall. And then there's a plan to eventually, I guess, move town hall back to those buildings. The second part of that would be the town green itself. The general condition is in poor shape compared to its not so recent history in terms of trees, area. You compare it to Suffield, Lexington, Concord, Hopkinton, other areas. I think, it should, something on the historic town green should be in this plan, given that it's a focal point of the town. If you, are you going to be taking this in, or do you want to respond? I know we can send our questions, etc., submit them in writing. So how do you want to do this, Corinne?
Just to your last comment, that's a great point. I do want to let everybody know that this right now is a time for discussion, and generally definitely Cheryl, Judy, and I are listening for themes of the conversation, etc. But you should not consider this, anyone who gives a comment or asks a question should not consider this your official comments that you're submitting to the plan. We need those to be submitted via the comment resolution matrix, which is posted right with the full document of the plan on our website. And those can be printed and handwritten and turned into me. They can be emailed to me. They can be submitted via Google. So we've tried to make that very accessible, but we are not taking other people's words and writing them down verbatim to represent their comments. So that's just something for everybody to know tonight. Tom, tonight, in terms of the comments that you have made or the questions that you've asked, we can speak to them in whatever depth we're able to. But definitely if there's, details that you would like further attention to after this conversation, I recommend you fill one of those comment resolution matrices out. So Judy, I don't know, Judy and Cheryl, I don't know if you have anything you would like to say. There's certainly some things I could address, but I'll let
Sure.
you speak first if you have anything.
Yeah, I think that, Judy, are you able to pull up? I know that we addressed historic preservation in the plan. Are you able to pull that up just so Tom can see it directly? I think that might be helpful for you, Tom.
So
It's a
in
little
the
more
slide-
general. Yeah,
okay, hold on.
it's a little more general, Tom, but I think it gets at what you're speaking to.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I got nothing here. I don't know if I'm still live or not.
Can you see my slide?
It's, did you just stop share?
I don't know what's going on. Hold on. Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it, or I can see it.
So I don't know if that's directly really addressing his comment. Because this is really just an overview of what's in the inventory. So
Yeah,
I think if the concern is that something's missing, I think, Corinne, when all the comments do come in, you're going to have to decide how you want to address them. I think it's the best
Yeah.
answer we can give.
So, and so one thing that I would reply to this is that no one disagrees that the town green is not, is like it's definitely a focal point of the town. Everybody talks about it. We all know where it is. It's very important. It's highly used. In the rest of the document, I have received several comments like this regarding people's special interests. And I don't mean that phrase pejoratively. I just mean the things that people happen to be particularly interested in that they have noticed that they feel like might be missing from the plan. And one of the challenges with master plan, and I think Judy has done way more of these than I have, so I think she could back me up though, is that the plan itself, we do spend quite a lot of time and go into quite a lot of detail in developing it, but the plan has to cover so much ground that we cannot go into such high detail that we have recommendations for every feature of town. And so regarding the green as an example, throughout the rest of the document, I'm speaking off the top of my head, so I don't want to get caught in like a falsehood, but I cannot think of a time where a specific park is called out with a specific action to better that park. The recommendations in the open space and recreation chapter are generally, this is what the town can do to improve access to open space generally in town, or to improve programming in open space generally in town. So for example, Turner Park probably does not have a direct recommendation regarding itself, although there are certainly items that we know should be happening in Turner Park or Bliss Park or Laurel Park, Greenwood Park, etc. So that is also the case for the town green. To Cheryl's point regarding the town green and historic preservation, it's again, I would say the same thing, which is that the recommendations are more high level, but one of the recommendations in the historic preservation recommendations chapter is that we create an inventory of those sort of cultural resources that we don't currently have inventoried. So, we have historic buildings inventoried, and there's the historic district, north and south itself, but then there's other sort of like less architectural resources that could still be considered historic resources that are important to Long Meadow's aesthetic and cultural history. And so I would say that implementing that recommendation would certainly spend a lot of time focusing on the green and areas adjacent to the green and related to the green itself. And I can't remember if there was another part of your question, Tom, other than we talked about the green and
No, I think that's probably good. Like I said, I recently saw something about East Long Meadow focusing on their core of the town and historic areas of that. You can go on to someone else, or I have if you will, a follow-up, but go right ahead.
Well, to that point, Tom, I think the only other, so I'm seeing that there is a written question, but it looks to be your question in the chat. So
I think I tried to erase that. I erased that because I wasn't sure we were going to do a full Q&A.
Yeah, that's all right. So the one thing that I'll just say about what I'm pretty sure you're referring to in East Longmeadow is that, so several years ago, maybe 3 at this point, or 4, it might have been in 2020, East Longmeadow wrapped up their version of their master plan or comprehensive plan. I don't know what they call it, long range plan update. And one of the recommendations in that plan, I believe, was to do this downtown district plan. And so what they are currently kicking off is the downtown district plan. So in and of itself, that plan is not part of their master planning process, but it was one of the recommendations identified in that, and now they're implementing that recommendation. So that plan is going to be much more highly detailed on economic development and, aesthetic considerations, design considerations, et cetera, for their downtown district specifically. So it's a
Right.
related process, but separate.
That is true. We worked on that plan with Pioneer Valley Planning
Right.
Commission. So your memory is very good. That's exactly
Yeah.
what it is.
And did you say you had a follow-up, Tom?
I did, and I guess two parts. This is very good. A general question, then a more specific one. So this is the unveiling, if you will, and I had seen a draft earlier, and we were able to send in the original input for the data bank, 195 pages. But is this the last chance that people will have to discuss this before it goes to the planning board and the select board, or do you plan on any type of, public meeting, or is it fill out the form and folks will take that into consideration? And I know there's a time deadline, so that's my first question. And then the second one, this is more a general, but also a specific. So there's a senior focus, there's a capital plan. Page 126, there's a discussion of sewer rates, and we talk about equity, affordability. The town, as everyone knows, has large CapEx coming up, large water and sewer needs. Our rates are going up significantly this year. We're going to get the 15 million of our cost of Springfield's new water treatment plant. And then we've got $150 million middle school, which I strongly support. So what my basic question is, given that we're senior focused, we're looking at capital plan and sewer rates, I would suggest that the town, as part of this long range plan, and I know we've got a climate focus, but it all kind of interrelates in that you need to know what you can afford and not afford. So my point is, the town should have a 5-year budget forecast, general fund, school, the capital plan that you've talked about, because that's very important, then water and sewer rates and bonding capacity. That way, projected tax rates and water and sewer rates are derived. So number one, the town knows what it can afford. And also the citizens need to have a voice on what they can afford. I think that should be part of a long range plan. Any thoughts on that, Ms. Barrett or Corinne?
So I can step in. I mean, typically at a master plan level, we're not doing financial projections. That's typically not part of the process. If we identify a need and there's a capacity need, whether it's money or staff, we would identify that in the implementation program. If there's going to be a capital investment, we're going to identify that you're probably going to be looking at bonding, but we're not doing actual financial projections.
No, Ms. Barrett, I wasn't expecting you to.
Oh,
I've
okay.
kind of, checked into what you guys do, and I believe I understand it. But as part of the recommendations here, I was looking for a recommendation that said 5-year capital plan would be here. Because like I said, a 5-year capital plan would have, whatever climate initiatives, whatever school building improvements, athletic facilities. And in fact, you do have something in here on page 126 to look into sewer rates. So I wasn't looking for you to do it, but I think what I'm asking is, I think it's very important that the town do it, because otherwise a lot of this somewhat becomes moot.
I'm going to jump in here, Tom. Judy, are you able to pull up the wheel that we worked on? Tom,
Well,
there
there's a-
were
what?
there's a financial piece there, definitely.
yeah, there is. And so one of the things that was on the committee's mind throughout the whole process was fiscal responsibility. And so although, the term 5-year fiscal plan does not appear within the document itself, a lot of the recommendations do have fiscal responsibility in mind. And so, it certainly wasn't discounted in the formation of the plan.
Sure, I realize that because like I said, I saw that in the wheel. I guess I'm kind of old school here. If a lot of times if things are not in writing or, brought up, I hate to say it, there's generalities here. I think the town needs some specifics as we go forward. Like I said, otherwise, if you don't have a plan on the financial, and I like I said, I do remember that being in the wheel. If you don't have a plan financially, you're not going to be able to implement things that you would want to otherwise do. So I just ask that consideration be given to including said 5-year financial forecast. That's all I got there. Thank you though for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any more written comments. If anybody else has a comment or question that they would prefer to ask verbally, you can definitely feel free to raise your hand. That's the only way we'll know if you have anything to say. So maybe we can give it just a couple of like a minute to see if anybody else raises their hand or writes something in the chat. While we're waiting, I just want to emphasize what Judy had on one of her last slides regarding the next steps. So our next program, and to Tom's point, our next programmed presentation and discussion will be the joint meeting of the Select Board and Planning Board. That is scheduled for June 5th, 6th, whatever the first Wednesday in June is. And
That's the 5th.
The 5th, thank you. That will be at 6 p.m. right before the regular planning board meeting. And that will be both an in-person option, and we will also have a Zoom link for a hybrid meeting if anybody wants to sit in on that and hear the conversation between the select board and the planning board. And if there's time, we have to keep that to a strict hour. So if there's time, there will also be an opportunity for some public comments there. Although again, comments should be submitted via the comment resolution matrix available on our website. And then after that, the schedule is really on the planning board's timeline to decide when they're going to take this up for a vote. But as Judy said, there's some items in there that we know that we can just start to begin implementing right away because they're totally within the purview of town staff, or there might be something that's already ongoing. Some of these recommendations we have either already started on or have made good progress on over the course of the 2 years that we've been working on this plan. This is the final public forum that is structured like this. We are almost at the very end of this project. Our contract with Barrett Planning Group ends in June. The grant is over June 30th. So we're definitely at the end here. And not seeing any other questions, I would just like to thank everybody who's been a part of this process so far, including all of the residents and community members who participated in interviews, who filled out our surveys, showed up to many of our we had many public engagement events that were either directly focused on the plan or were tangentially related to the plan and celebrating other sort of activities that were happening to raise awareness of the plan or promote some of the themes of the plan, such as climate resilience, et cetera. And also, of course, to the Long Range Plan Steering Committee, we had 18 members. It was a very large committee, and it's hard to come to agreement and consensus on a lot of these topics that people care very deeply about, especially in a large and diverse committee. So I want to thank them and also town staff and the planning board and the select board for encouraging this project and moving it forward. And Judy and Cheryl, I don't know if you have anything else you would like to add. I am seeing there's something else in the Q&A. Oh, Dan saying thank you. Great job. So thanks, Dan. So Cheryl and Judy, if you wanted to say anything, please go ahead.
No, this has been a truly rewarding process. The committee was a diverse group, and I think I can say that we had a lot of meaningful and robust conversation, and quite frankly, we had a lot of fun putting together the plan. So I'm excited, for everyone to see it and to provide comments and, to put this in the books as our plan for the next 10 or so years.
I think it's important to point out that the town really did something very innovative here. You don't find master plans done this way. This is truly a unique and badly needed approach. The way you've integrated these different sort of cross-cutting themes in, it gives the plan shape and structure and focus that I think a lot of plans miss. So that part of the process, I think, was especially appealing to us. I could just commend the town for being innovative because a lot of places are not.
Yeah, and of course, I realized in my thank you, I left out our consultants. So thank you, Judy. Thanks to Barrett Planning Group, Beta, PVPC, everybody who helped us do this. So great. Okay, so I think that's it. No more questions or comments in the chat. So I'm going to stop recording and say good night to everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.